Now it is a pleasure to welcome an old friend back to the laboratory, Dr. Larry Robinson, and our keynote speaker. Dr. Robinson is a distinguished alumnus of ORNL, currently serving as interim president of Florida A&M University. He began his career as a research chemist at the laboratory in 1984. After receiving his bachelor's degree from Memphis State University with summa cum laude and a PhD in nuclear chemistry from Washington University in St. Louis. He served ORNL both as a research scientist and a research group leader, including research on the detection of trace elements in environmental matrices by nuclear methods. In 1991, in one of the most publicized experiments at the laboratory, Dr. Robinson used neutron activation analysis to determine that President Zachary Taylor did not die from arsenic poisoning, debunking a long-standing popular myth. In 1997, Dr. Robinson joined Florida A&M University as director of the Environmental Sciences Institute, where he established both bachelor's and doctoral programs. In 2007, he became the university's chief operating officer and vice president for research. In 2010 and 11, he served as assistant secretary for conservation and management in the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration. And then he returned to Florida A&M and was named interim president in 2012. It was a pleasure to know Dr. Robinson when he was at ORNL, and it was a pleasure to welcome him back for his lecture on African Americans and education. Dr. Robinson.
Thank you, Dan, for that very fine introduction, and thank all of you for coming out this morning to spend a little time with me here. I can't tell you how touched I am to be able to come back to Oak Ridge, in particular at this time, Black History Month, and seeing so many of you here. I see so many familiar faces in the audience. Some of you I didn't want to see again, like David Glasgow. So many others I welcome seeing. David and I, well, we spent a lot of time together working in the bowels of the high flux isotope reactor. And, if he could put up with me, then, then I know he could take a few of my jokes now. But it was a pleasure working with David and so many others at this institution. I want to first thank Georgia Williams and everyone who were responsible for inviting me here, and Ms. Williams for ensuring that in spite of all of my efforts to do otherwise, that I didn't get lost. I actually did get lost yesterday after she left me, of course. I also want to thank Ms. Whitaker, our MC this morning, and all of you who have contributed to this month's program. I'm pleased to hear that this is the 25th year. Some of you may recall that I left Oak Ridge in January of 1997. I celebrated my 20th year at Fordham University on January the 13th, 1997. And I wanted to thank Dr. Roberto for that introduction, but there's one thing I wanted to add because it's critically important, and that is, yes, I got my bachelor's degree in chemistry from the now University of Memphis, formerly Memphis State University, and my doctorate from Washington University in St. Louis, but I actually started my academic career at LeMoyne College in Memphis, Tennessee, a small historically black college in that town, a small institution, but an institution that played a large role in where I am today. I like to tell the story that by the time that I got to places where people questioned my ability to be successful as a chemist or in STEM in general, it was already too late because the folks at the ORNL had already convinced me otherwise. Okay? So that's the type of thing we do at historically black colleges throughout this nation. So I have to really remind everyone that sentence, I always try to figure out an interesting way to put it in on my vita about attending Lemoyne College is extremely important to me. And I put it there deliberately, Jim. I know you did everything right. But I just want to make sure that on the record, everyone knows that it was an HBCU, I believe, along with a lot of other factors, some of which I will allude to later, that are responsible for me being here today. And this is a special time. It's an important time to me, in particular to come back. I came back to the laboratory, I believe in 2012, when I was at NOAA as Assistant Secretary there to celebrate the awarding of these huge bioenergy grants that DOE was awarding at that time. And I was just fascinated by the change in the landscape here, right? I think that during my tenure at the laboratory, we were celebrating 50 years of existence at that time. And, for many of you who were here then probably know too that most of our buildings had been here at least 50 years as well. And so to come back and see this, right, this type of investment by DOE, and I know through the state of Tennessee, through UT Battelle, it's just remarkable. And it is a very, very wise investment. And so I'm really glad to be back to see all of this progress that has occurred in Oak Ridge. And I know too that the spallation source is a large part of that, right? But Jim, you know too how we argued for something else, right? We actually argued for the advanced neutron source. And those of you who remember, the advanced neutron source was going to be this 300 plus megawatt research reactor that could do everything that the spallation source could do and a whole lot more. So I'm not giving up on that, right? But I'm glad to see the renovations that took place at the high flux isotope reactor. We didn't quite get the advanced neutron source, but we did invest in the HYFER so that we can continue with neutron science and be internationally competitive as we had envisioned to a certain extent with the advanced neutron source. So at Florida A&M University and in Tallahassee, Florida, and I'm sure in communities around this country, this month is not taken lightly. And I know that's why the citizens here in the Oak Ridge area, the Oak Ridge-Knoxville area, saw fit to ensure that even in great places like this, designed to do great work on the behalf of this country, that we pause for a minute and think about the outstanding contributions made by African Americans throughout our history, but also, just as importantly, to talk about what we can do to ensure that these contributions continue well into our future. And that's one of the reasons I left the laboratory. It was a hard decision to leave the laboratory at that time, because for a nuclear scientist, you had every toy that you could imagine, right? You had every kind of problem that you could imagine too. So to leave that, it was a tough decision. However, what Florida A&M University offered me was an opportunity to go out and work on creating that next generation of scientists from underrepresented population in particular that I care dearly about, so it's that the Oak Ridges of the world would have a place to go to find and to tap into that generally untouched talent, I thought. And so as tough as it was, and as proud as I am about the 12 years I spent here, I have never regretted leaving the laboratory. And it's largely because of all of the relationships that I developed here were just as strong after me leaving as they were before I left. You know, David Glasgow and I, we have collaborated on a number of things. I can't tell you how many students and faculty I've sent up, you know, to work in this laboratory. You know, when I asked, you know, our deans to send me some general information on what they were doing at Oak Ridge, I wanted to say a little bit about it when I came, but I got so much stuff back, Jim, I just said, forget it. The whole talk would then be about the collaborative work that we're doing within our faculty and our students at FAMU with somebody here at Oak Ridge National Laboratory. It's really impressive. But the important thing is that the conduit and access to all that you have to offer has been afforded to me and all of the students at FAMU and HBCUs around the country, that I think I made the right decision to leave. We've also been able to, since I've been gone, to see some other developments that have contributed to the welfare, not only of places like ORNL, but places in the federal sector where human, you know, capital, and particularly in the STEM areas, is so important. You know, it just so happened, this is just so bizarre to me, right? You know, when I went to FAMU, I figured that if I ever sent a student of mine back to any place to work in Oak Ridge, it would be at Oak Ridge National Laboratory, right? I never thought that I would have one to come back and work for the Department of Energy, right? Well, that happened. You know, one of my graduate students here, sitting on the front row, Mr. Aaron White, was one of my graduate students at Florida A&M University in the now School of the Environment. I never would have thought that I would be responsible for someone going to work for DOE, right? I don't want to offend any of my DOE colleagues. That's a running joke. Some of the people in ORNL can appreciate it, some of you can't. But then there was before Zachary Taylor, right? Before Zachary Taylor, long before then, I remember I was in the gymnasium in my final year at Washington University. I was waiting to defend my dissertation. And I had done my research out in Los Alamos, and one of the chemistry professors, you know, asked me where was I going. And at that time, I had received and accepted the offer to come to Oak Ridge. And I told him I was coming to Oak Ridge, and he said, "Oh, really?" He said, "Didn't you just read that article in Science about, you know, that huge mercury problem that they have there, right?" I said, "No, I missed that one." But I did go and look, and it turns out that problem, the contamination of East Fork Poplar Creek, would be one of the things that I would spend a lot of time working on here, along with David. My goodness, thousands and thousands of analyses associated with that. But then there was this little place on Illinois Avenue, right? This laboratory that is operated by NOAA, that played a large role in some of the atmospheric sampling that helped, you know, sort of, you know, reveal that, working with some of the former scientists in the Environmental Sciences Division. I never would have thought that my first PhD student from Florida A&M University School of the Environment wouldn't come to Oak Ridge to work, but would go to work at NOAA, at that NOAA facility. That student, Dr. LaToya Miles, is in the audience as well. Dr. Miles. Dr. Miles, my first PhD student at FAMU, has not only gone to work for the NOAA facility here, but I believe she is now the deputy director there, and the first female, certainly the first African-American female to serve in that capacity. So, you know, I think I've made the right decision there. But how does any of this at all, other than them coming to FAMU, which happens to be at HBCU, how does any of this relate to Oak Ridge? Well, long before Dr. Miles selected, and she thinks he voluntarily selected FAMU to attend, I actually hosted her department chair from Alcorn State University, another HBCU, for about 6 summers in my laboratory, now Dave's laboratory, at the high flux isotope reactor. She was one of Dr. Russell's superstars. She was about to make the mistake of going to some other institution, right? When I was able to convince him and her that FAMU was the right place. So Oak Ridge played a part in all of that. And so my connection to ORNL has been very productive, long after I left here, and it's going to continue through the work that these young people will do at DOE and at NOAA. And I can't tell you how many more we have like that, but since they happen to be in the room, I just thought I would give them a shout out this morning. So when I was here in Oak Ridge 20 years ago, I also had the pleasure of serving as the president of the Oak Ridge branch of the NAACP. During that time, as president, I was able to develop an even greater awareness and reverence for the mission of that organization, a mission that seeks to ensure the political, educational, and social and economic equality and rights of all people. I served in that capacity for 6 years as president and a lot longer in other capacities. The mission of that organization resonates very well with the leadership and vision of so many key figures in the civil rights movement and with Black history in general. And when I see the young people here in SECME, do a tribute to Dr. King, it touches me in a very special way because when I was the age of some of those kids growing up in Memphis, Tennessee, I was 13 years old at the time that Dr. King was assassinated there. And in a strange way, I had this notion, this idea, this burden that somehow I could have done something to stop that. Why did it have to happen in my town? And so over time, I translated that into maybe doing something about the types of problems and issues that Dr. King had committed his life to over the course of my career. And going to an institution like Florida A&M University that contributed to the educational and economic well-being of so many citizens in Florida and around the nation, I thought was a very good idea and aligned very well with Dr. King's challenge to us when he said, life's most persistent and urgent question is, what are you doing for others? Going to Florida A&M University gave me an opportunity to do quite a bit for others. The opening statement in our mission statement at Florida A&M University reads as follows. Florida Agricultural and Mechanical University is an 1890 land-grant institution dedicated to the advancement of knowledge, resolution of complex issues, and the empowerment of citizens and communities. And it concludes with the following statement. While the university continues its historic mission of educating African Americans, FAMU embraces persons of all races, ethnic origins, and nationalities as lifelong members of the university community. And so what that says is that although we were founded as the Negro Normal School on October the 3rd, 1887, FAMU got it right from the start. We were the first co-educational public institution in the state of Florida. Many of you probably know that the Gators, UF, was an all-male institution, and the Seminoles, Florida State University was an all-female institution. So FAMU got it right from the start. Furthermore, no one ever stood on the steps of FAMU and said, you couldn't come here, right? No one ever did that, and no one ever will. FAMU got it right from the start, but so did so many other historically black colleges, public and private, around the country. Our doors have been open to everyone. At FAMU, we express quite a bit of appreciation for the events leading to our founding on October the 3rd, 1887. And we're going into, those of you who can do the arithmetic quickly in your head, we'll be celebrating our 130th year on October the 3rd. However, had it not been for visionary leadership, unrelenting support of alumni and friends, and countless prayers, we might be telling a totally different story today. Current data, as you heard a little bit of earlier, reveal that despite all of the challenges throughout our history and those that we currently deal with at our universities, tight budgets, comparatively limited resources, America's HBCUs enroll 11% of black students in the United States while representing less than 3% of all of the colleges and universities in the nations. According to the statistics from the National Science Foundation, nearly one-third of all doctorate degrees awarded in the sciences to African Americans went to men and women who attended HBCUs as undergraduates. That's 1 out of 3. And remember, we only constitute 11% of all of the students, right? So if you really were a gambling parent trying to figure out where to send your son or daughter to get to the next level, well, I just told you, you got great odds in your favor if you send them to one of America's historically black colleges, in particular, Florida A&M University. With this being the case, HBCUs account for 60% of all African Americans, 60% of all African Americans who go on to earn doctoral degrees in STEM areas. In other academic areas, HBCUs produce nearly half of all black public school teachers, half of all future lawyers, and 8 in every 10 black judges in America. You know, these are just some amazing statistics for a group of 107 institutions, the largest of which is about 12,000. And you could take the endowments of all of these institutions collectively, and you wouldn't get to 1/10 of the endowment that Harvard has, okay? You wouldn't even get close to that. Florida A&M University has the largest endowment of any public HBCU in the country, and we're very proud of it. It's only $117 million. It's kind of hard for me to say only $170 million, but if you're looking at endowments at not only private institutions, but a lot of public institutions that have endowments in the billions of dollars range, you can see that with so little, we're able to do so much. In the past, HBCUs have served as models of how to teach first-generation students the habits of success. The vast majority of our students today at Florida A&M University and at HBCUs in general are first generation. There's nobody at home with a PhD to say, here's what you need to do to get to the PhD. Had that been the case, had that been necessary, without the type of guidance and encouragement I got at Lemoyne, I wouldn't be here, because there certainly wasn't anyone in my house hold with a PhD. My older brother and sister were the only people in my family who went to college before I did. Okay, and we're talking about a couple of years, not about a couple of generations. However, through innovative approaches, novel retention methods, at Florida A&M University and other HBCUs, we have been able to serve students from all ability groups and economic circumstances, propelling them into successful careers. At Florida A&M University, for example, the average salary of our graduates, this is very important, I believe, the average salary of our graduates exceeds their reported household income. So what that means is that the average student that comes to us in less than one generation make more money than the combined income of their parents and guardians. So we have sort of turned and flipped their economic reality in 4, 5, 6, and sometimes longer, but certainly in less than a generation, okay? That's a remarkable feat. Historically black colleges and universities are largely responsible for the emergence of the black middle class throughout this country. And if you want to know how it happened in the North, well, they came to the South. You know, if you really think about the footprint in terms of where our alumni are at FAMU, we have these huge connections with places like Washington, D.C., Detroit, Chicago, Cincinnati, because so many folks who came seeking degrees, in particular advanced degrees, came to the South. And then do the things that made no sense at all. There were so many people who obtained advanced degrees, professional degrees, and could not practice in the South, and they went north. So that relationship is really formidable. In 2014, the Social Mobility Index ranked Florida A&M University the number 3 institution in the nation for facilitating economic opportunity and underserved students. We outpaced the nation's leading Ivy League institutions such as Princeton, Harvard, and Yale, which placed 360th, 438th, 440th, respectively, on the rankings. Now, I think I better stop the comparisons right there, right? But the point is that there is a difference, right? And what we measure in some cases isn't a consequence of what happened to the students during the educational experience. A lot of time, a lot of the metrics we talk about in higher education, you're only measuring what the students came to you with. You didn't transform them in any way. And sometimes, you know, when we talk about things like graduation rates, we're only really measuring what the students came to us with. But because, for example, and I know this personally because all 3 of my daughters took advantage of the International Baccalaureate degree program one of the high schools had to offer in Tallahassee. And they entered college, you know, pretty much as sophomores, right? Even slightly beyond. And so why would that kid, those kids, be measured on by the same metric as a kid who is coming out of a public school system with the minimum requirements for graduation, right? So instead of measuring the actual graduation rate, what we ought to start looking at is what is the anticipated graduation rate, right? Because if I got my freshman and sophomore year to a certain extent under my belt, I shouldn't be measured by a 6-year graduation rate, right? Maybe it ought to be something different. But that's not the way it is. That's not the way it is. And so now I want to spend a few minutes talking about this crisis in black education, right? Because you've heard about all the wonderful things that, you know, I'm talking about we're doing at Fordham University and within our sister HBCU institutions. So what's the crisis, right? What's the problem that is still occurring right now? And of course, there has to be a crisis because everybody says that there is, right? So let's talk about it. I mean, this is a serious matter. So here's some of the things that we know with regard to the crisis. According to the National Center for Educational Statistics, there is a chronic underrepresentation of teachers of color in U.S. schools compared to existing and growing population of students of color. Children of color in U.S. schools represent 47% in 2015, teachers of color in U.S. schools represent only 17% in 2015. White teachers, on the other hand, are overrepresented. White students in the U.S. schools represent 49% in 2015, white teachers 82% in 2015. So at the heart of the teacher crisis, there are perceived by some to be two major issues. One is a teacher shortage with regard to teachers of color in particular. And number two, the quality of teachers prepared by teacher educational programs throughout the country, in particular when it comes to STEM. Teachers of color comprise less than 18% of the public school workforce in 2015. Black male teachers represent only 2% of the teaching workforce in the public schools in this country. By 2020, an estimated 300,000 new teachers will be needed each year. And by 2025, that number will increase to 316,000 teachers. So one dimension of this crisis is defined by the statistics that I just described. And unless major changes in teacher supply or a reduction in demand for additional teachers occurs over the coming years, annual teacher shortages could increase by as many as 112,000 teachers by 2018. So to some, that constitutes a real crisis for our K through 12 educational system in the country. But let's dig just a little bit deeper. I don't know if that's the whole crisis. It may be a little bit more to it. And for the scientists, engineers here, you never take anything on first value, right? It's in your tradition to keep digging and to keep digging and to keep digging to get to the root cause. In fact, when I was here, among the pages of training courses I took, some of you probably remember root cause analysis, right? My God, I used that to death. You know, I sometimes misapply it. It didn't work on my daughters at all, because I kept getting to the root cause and it was me, you know. All of their problems I could trace back to me, so I said, let's stop this root cause stuff right now. So let's go just a little bit further. In a 2014 report from Education Trust entitled The State of Education for African American Students, it says that over the past few decades, African American students across the nation have actually made real gains in academic achievement. Yet, too many African American students still are not getting the quality education they need and deserve, and the performance of African American students still lags far behind that of white students. These gaps in achievement are driven by gaps in opportunity. African American students receive fewer of the within-school resources and experiences that are known to contribute to academic achievement. Now, I want to really just expand on this for a minute, because this goes to something that you can all relate to. You, those of you who stay in Oak Ridge in particular, you know, you have the benefit of having one of the best public school systems in the state of Tennessee, perhaps anywhere, right? But you're probably dumbfounded, as I was, to find that there are students who can come out of this system, this wonderful system, and go to any place, any university, and there are those who are not quite eligible to get to a community college, right? And what's wrong with that? Is that's what this really is trying to allude to. African American students receive fewer of the within-school resources and experiences that are known to contribute to academic achievement. And why does that happen? Why does that happen? I'll just give you it's a personal story. You know, ever since this country evolved from the single schoolhouse, right, and we had to deal with, you know, large classrooms, huge public school systems, part of our solution to that has been ability grouping, right? I mean, we just, for whatever reason, thought that if we put these kinds of students over here with regard to their ability and these kinds over here, then we could preserve a route to, we could have a mechanism of preserving all of our human and workforce needs just with these, right? And then we wondered why, and we wonder to this day, why when you look at our nation as a whole, we don't seem to be making any ground in terms of international competitiveness, right? And I think the problem is that until we figure out a way that we excite, encourage all of these students, regardless of their perceived ability to achieve beyond their own expectations, we're never going to be able to compete with the likes of China when, you know, we are the 0.3 in the 1.3 billion people that we have. It's just not enough people, you see. I can afford if you know, well, philosophically or fundamentally, it's a bad idea anyway because everybody knows, the data shows, if you put students of different abilities together, guess what? They all tend to perform better. But if you separate them like that, yes, it's going to do exactly what you would expect. These will perform better and these won't, you see. And so, you know, my wife and I, this is my last personal story. My wife and I, before our first child was born here in Oak Ridge, got legal custody of my niece and nephew from the public who were in the public school system of Memphis, Tennessee. And we brought them here. My niece was in the 2nd grade. My nephew was in the 6th grade. And so I brought him here around 1988 and put him in this wonderful school system. One day, my nephew came home, and I asked, what did you do in math today? And he told me social studies or something, right? Well, wait a minute, what were you doing social studies in math, right? This is the math class, right? He said, yeah, but the teacher told me that I was so far ahead of everyone else that I needed to do something while the rest of the kids caught up, right? Now, wait a minute. Now, I knew a little bit about, you know, our tracking and grouping here, but I had assumed that once Robert Robinson demonstrated his capacity to be at a higher level, then that would naturally occur. Someone would say, okay, it's time, Robert, for you to go to this next level. That didn't happen. In fact, my wife and I almost had to insist, if not demand, that Robert Robinson be put in that higher tier math. Now, can you imagine? You know, here it is. I had a PhD from a relatively good school, some people say. My wife has a physical therapy degree from that same school, pretty good medical program, some people say. Now, can you imagine this is what we are experiencing, reasonably well educated. What about the single parent, no kind of college experience or anything, when they face that type of situation? So if you want to know why, when I was here in NAACP, we did everything we could to address this problem. That's why, because these resources that this study talks about not being available aren't like they're somewhere on the other side of the universe. They're right there in the grasp, in the reach of these young people, but for a lot of reasons, some of them that just don't make any sense at all, they're not exposed to them, right? And once again, until we get more of these kids, a broader group of kids exposed to these types of educational opportunities, which are resident here in these types of systems like we have in Oak Ridge, then, you know, Tennessee, Oak Ridge, and this nation won't ever be as good as they can. For example, this study points out that African American students remain underrepresented among AP test takers. 15% of graduates in the class of 2013 were African Americans. Now, these are data that actually showed some increases over the years, But African American students made up only 9% of those who took AP test, and of that 9%, only 5% passed an AP exam who were African Americans. So perhaps that's another dimension to the crisis, and that is our educational system perhaps isn't designed to take advantage or to include all of the potential contributors to the well-being of places like Oak Ridge early enough such that by the time they get to us at Florida A&M University, we can do all those wonderful things that I talked about earlier, okay? But then that's probably not the biggest crisis according to some. There's another dimension that I wanted to share with you this morning. In a USA Today article, that peer-reviewed journal that we all subscribe to from time to time, as researchers Michael Rebel and Jessica Wolf of the Campaign for Educational Equity at Teachers College in Columbia University noted that there is no general education crisis in the United States. So they've taken it all off the table. There's no education crisis. What they say is that there's a child poverty crisis that is impacting education. Okay? Here's one data point worth remembering. When you measure the test scores of African American schools with a child poverty rate of less than 20%, our kids not only perform the nation that at the top defends, we actually outperform every nation in the world. So that is, if you normalize for poverty, we do some things extremely well with regard to our educational system in this country. There was a second study conducted by the National Student Clearinghouse Research Center that revealed that poverty, not race, not ethnicity, not national origin, or where you attend school, is the best predictor of college attendance and completion. You know, one of my former bosses at FAMU used to say, and I can tell a student's college readiness by their zip code, because their zip codes correlated so strongly with their economic status, certainly in the state of Florida. And so if you believe these facts, then they seem to suggest that there is a crisis. But why is there a crisis in black education if it's only a crisis relating to the economic status of citizens around the country? Well, here's why. Among racial and ethnic groups, African Americans had the highest poverty rate, 27.4%, followed by Hispanics at 26.6%, and whites at only 9.9%. 45.8% of young black children under the age of 6 live in poverty compared to 14.5% of white students. So therein lies the real crisis, right? So it's not just about teachers, it's not just about the system, it's really about the economic status of kids and families in this country. And therein lies the dilemma, because it basically says, if the way out of poverty is through a higher education. But you can't get out of poverty to get access to the system. So it's one of those dilemmas, right? It's an ugly, nasty, tough dilemma. One of those kinds of problems that you like to work on here, Jim, in Oak Ridge, right? You don't get the easy stuff to do here at the National Laboratory. Otherwise, we don't need national laboratories, right? The easy stuff is done somewhere in Finland, right? You do the tough stuff here. And I've always bragged about how, Oak Ridge, the DOE system in general, right? We do the tough stuff. The easy stuff is done out there. I used to say at some university somewhere, but I can't say that anymore, right? But so you address the tough issues, and here's a tough one for you, right? Because in order to sustain all of this into the future, we're going to have to figure out a way, right, of breaking through this dilemma, right? And I know that you will. I know that you will. I think some of the things that are being done now, I think, although there's pros and cons, and you might not like it, but I think, for example, the Tennessee Promise program, where students in this state are getting free community college education, is going to help, alleviate some of the economic difficulties that young people face in going to college, right? Now, the problem is you don't want that to be the default system for kids who could have otherwise gone to the University of Tennessee or the Moore and got a bachelor's degree and then come on to join the ranks of the distinguished scientific community at Oak Ridge National Laboratory. You don't want that to be the end point. In Florida, we have what we believe and brag about is one of the most seamless articulation systems with our state colleges. But we're deliberately forming more focused agreements that we're calling 2+2 because we need to feed more into that huge base of students to feed into the state university system. Because if we don't do that, that's where students who are more likely to start who have sort of the economic challenges that I talked about earlier. So we have to secure those kinds of relationships, we believe, to be successful. There are huge benefactors to support various initiatives, people like the Gates Foundation and so forth. But I don't think we can afford to sit around and wait for a miracle to fall out of the sky. At FAMU, we're not inclined to wait for the second coming. Nobody's going to come to our rescue here. We're going to have to figure this out ourselves because our future depends upon it, the future of this laboratory, the future of this nation. And so we're willing to take this on. Anybody who want to work with us on it, we think we have some ideas, right? We have lots of them. I don't have enough time to go into them today because I believe I'm already running over. But I do have one or two more things I need to say before I take my seat. At Fordham University, we're looking for partners to join hands with us in what we believe is an extremely noble and extremely important endeavor. I know from my own personal experiences here, as I said, that you and ORNL in general have stared down some of the world's most difficult problems in science and in engineering and in technology. And you also know that one of those challenges is supplying the human resources needed to sustain the great work that you have done here over the years. We are looking for partners to work with us because we have figured out a way to take students that so many others would have never given a chance and provided them with opportunities to become great scientists, engineers, lawyers, performers, etc. We don't have all of the answers at Florida A&M University, but like all of you in the audience today, we are committed to providing solutions, finding solutions to as many as we possibly can. We are not accustomed to easy things at Florida A&M University. Throughout our 130-year history, nothing has ever been easy. We don't expect it to be easy, and I know you don't either. And if just anybody, any old Joe or any old Larry could figure this out, then they would, right? And so we need some smart Joes and some smarter Larrys in order to get this done. And I'm sorry, we need some Sallys and some Susans too. I forget that. I would wager that in this room somewhere, there are many people just like me. Somehow, I found a way out. We were poor. If my mother had to have paid for one dime of me to go to college, I wouldn't have gone, right? I just would not have gone. Somehow, like many of you, in spite of being in that vicious cycle, right, of poverty where people couldn't figure out how you could possibly get out of that, you were able to do it, right? And God knows that according to my zip code, growing up in Memphis, Tennessee, it is short of a miracle that I stand before you today as the interim president of Florida A&M University and a distinguished alumnus of Oak Ridge National Laboratory. This is why your presence here makes such a difference today, because I know you came out not just to enjoy the wonderful ribs and chicken that was served, and although it was pretty good, the barbecue, but remember I'm from Memphis, so nothing really compares. You didn't come out just to partake in those things and see a few friends and get an hour soup too off of work. You came out today to recommit yourselves, or commit yourselves to carrying on the baton to ensure that this nation has a bright future, and that young people, regardless as to what their circumstances are, have an opportunity to contribute to the great successes, I believe, that are on the horizon. And as you heard just a little bit from the young man today, one of Dr. King's most famous quotes from I Have a Dream speech in Washington, D.C. on August 28, 1963, went as follows. We have come to this hallowed spot to remind America of the fierce urgency of now. This is no time to engage in the luxury of cooling off or to take the tranquilizing drug of gradualism. Now is the time to make real the promises of democracy. And what we do at Florida A&M University in terms of providing educational opportunities for young men and women from around this nation, I think, is aligned with helping America fulfill its real promise of democracy. And we're willing to partner with anyone in this room who want to join us in that noble cause. Thank you very much.